Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to exporTT's Doing Business in the British Virgin Islands webinar. My name is Creque Espinosa, and I'm a research officer at exporTT. This webinar is the first time in our Doing Business series that we will be exclusively focused on services, namely architecture, engineering, construction, and ICT. We are really excited to bring to you today the results of this market survey, which we hope will enlighten you about the prospects in the BVI market. This project falls under our Export Booster initiative, through which we are continuing to support our potential and existing goods and services exporters by providing market intelligence, business advisory, financing, and trade promotion through trade missions and B2B meetings. Today, we will be bringing you insights about the BVI services market, including an overview, sector-specific information, the legal frameworks, logistics information, standards requirements, and industry perspectives. Before we begin, let me just go over some ground rules. Please keep your microphones muted and your cameras turned off. At certain points during the webinar, we will be having question and answer sessions. And if you have a question, you can use the chat box and I will relay them to the presenters. We hope you enjoyed today's session and leave knowing the opportunities and challenges that exist in the market. Without any further ado, I would like to introduce to you Dr. Erica Smith. She's the Executive Director of Intellect Management Services, which was the consulting firm in charge of the BVI market survey. Erica will be leading us through this morning's program. Erica, you can take it away. Thank you.
Hello, good morning. Thank you, Creque. Intellect Management Services is a consultancy firm based in Barbados, and we focus on a number of areas, including export development, general business consultancy, and intellectual rights management. For this project, we worked with associates in the British Virgin Islands. I'll introduce them to you. They really were key to the success of this project because of their areas of expertise. So we had with us Mr. Creque, who will be presenting with me today. Henry is a professional engineer and was able to provide good insight into that sector. We also had Mrs. Shirley Creque. Yes, they're related, but her area of expertise is actually in the ICT sector. We then had Mrs. Lorna Smith, who is herself a very experienced business consultant and has a lot of experience in terms of business facilitation and market entry into the BVI. We had Mrs. Laura Arthur, attorney at law, who is managing partner of Hunt & Co., a BVI law firm, also very experienced in terms of facilitating market entry into the BVI. And last but definitely not least, we had Miss Natalie Rochester. She's Jamaican and she is a regional trade expert, and we benefited tremendously from her input. So that was the team. It was fairly large, but it allowed for tremendous insight into a market that you will see requires specific local knowledge. So today's presentation, we will be providing an overview of the British Virgin Island market, specifically as it relates to the sectors of interest, architecture, construction, engineering, and ICT, but also more generally in terms of the operating environment. We will provide you with some information on the business opportunities for Trinidad and Tobago exporters. We will look at the limitations and conditions for entering the BVI market. We will provide an overview of the competitive market in the British Virgin Islands. We will give you some profiles of key service providers. We will review the market conditions for foreign service providers, give some insight on the pricing trends in the marketplace and logistics in the British Virgin Islands. Moreover, we will be joined a little later by some key practitioners out of the BVI to give you their insight. Specifically, we will have an attorney join us from Hunt & Co, who will delve a little more deeply into some of the requirements for market entry and the legal framework in the BVI. We will also be joined by experienced construction and architectural players as well, who will give their perspective from a more practical position. So I hope you will find this morning's session useful, and we look forward to a highly interactive webinar. So thank you very much. And I will now turn you over to Henry, who will begin with the market overview. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erica, and good morning to all. It's a pleasure and a privilege for us to be here, joining you for this, this seminar about essentially improving business links between Trinidad and Tobago and their British Virgin Islands. Many of you will know from our geography courses in primary school, Trinidad and Tobago is right here in the Caribbean on this map. And the British Virgin Islands is here, more or less in the northeastern quadrant of the Caribbean. We are a collection of 60 islands and keys, a United Kingdom overseas territory. Our population is about 35,000 people. GDP is currently approximately 1.2 billion US dollars, with a growth per year average of about 4.4% over the period of 2010 to 2017, which is when the last publicly available GDP figures were published. Per capita income, approximately 35,000 US dollars. Our official currency is the US dollar, which is a little strange to some people, but it's because of our geographic location and who our main trading partners are. The main industries in the BVI are tourism and financial services. Our main focus of this trade mission is to explore how we could improve linkages in the architecture, engineering, and construction industry, as well, of course, as the internet and communications technology sectors. Of our GDP mentioned before, about 30 million to 50 million comes from construction annually. This has been on the higher side of the range in recent years, coming out of our hurricanes Irma and Maria rebuilding. ICT contributes approximately $55 million annually to our GDP. This number is, however, inclusive of telecom services provision. Interestingly, construction usually contributes 3 to 5% of our total GDP, but it actually accounts for 9 to 10% of the number of persons employed. In terms of taxes, we are a zero income tax jurisdiction, which means there is no tax on profits earned. There are, however, taxes on payroll, with contributions being made from both the employer and the employee. We also have Social Security and national health insurance contribution based on payroll. The BVI has enjoyed a reputation of being a very safe jurisdiction and, of course, politically stable, as most of our neighbors in the English-speaking Caribbean are. And that has contributed to growth, especially in our main industries over the years. A COVID-19 update. As of the last report, we had 31 deaths in the British Virgin Islands, 30 of which have actually been over the past month. Total active cases are approximately 555. A week ago, they were over 1,000. We currently have a curfew in place from 7 p.m. to 5 a.m. Total shutdown from 7 p.m. and persons are allowed back out on the roads at 5 a.m. each morning. Borders are open, but persons are encouraged to work from home. We have 37.5% of the population fully vaccinated and 54.4% partially vaccinated. The territory's goal is to have at least 75% of our population fully vaccinated, so we are halfway there. Construction work is still ongoing and permitted in the territory, and travel is permitted across borders in both directions in accordance with our protocols that are in place. Erica?
Okay, so just to explain a little about the methodology, we interviewed and surveyed a number of firms and government entities in the BVI. We also did a survey of Trinidadian firms in order to have a sense as to what they're looking for, their interests, and to ensure that the information provided is not just theoretical. So the information we are providing has in large part been given directly from government and industry. So the BVI, although geographically located in the Caribbean, is only an associate member of CARICOM, and as such, there is no unrestricted or free movement of goods and labor into the BVI. Nonetheless, there is a strong willingness to collaborate and work with international firms and partners using different forms. And in this regard, government also, the BVI government also will advertise and encourage collaborations. And this is generally based on the complexity and size of the project. The government does have a system for advertising projects online, either via the websites of central government through the executing agency's website, or generally through online news publications. So information is widely shared in terms of opportunities to bid for projects. When we spoke with or in terms of examining the results from the survey, 85% of the respondents agree that the government actively encourages partnerships with international firms for major projects, with the expectation that there will be technology and skills transfer. The main areas identified for growth and development include ICT, renewable energy, especially post the 2017 hurricane season, tourism, education, and other general infrastructure. Currently, there's a lot of rebuilding underway, as well as new builds, which are currently being undertaken or planned for the near future by the private sector in Bitter End, Peter Island, Mosquito Island, Blunder Bay, and other areas. In terms of the damage that was done by the hurricanes, the UNDP estimates that the BVI is looking at about $3.6 billion in damage. In terms of insurance, the country has a number of highly rated insurance providers. So post the hurricanes, the Recovery Development Agency was established, and that has oversight for the recovery projects. And some examples of the work being undertaken or planned would be the Elmore Stoutt High School. And for your information, they're currently accepting pre-qualification bids from local and international firms. The rebuilding of the Government Central Administration Complex, and work for that was recently awarded. And then you have the Western Ferry Terminal, which is also due to be repaired. But there are a number of projects that are planned by the RDA, and the information on that can be found, or details on the site cited here. But we've also provided more information in this regard in our written document. Go ahead, Herman. So further examples of projects which are being planned by the government include a capital improvement program at the International Airport, the expansion of the cargo port systems, and the erection of a general cargo warehouse. In terms of ICT, enhancement of the security of the government's IT infrastructure, and digitization of government services. So there are quite a number of projects that have been planned in the sectors of interest, and these are only a few examples. And reiterating, there is a willingness to have international firms work on some of these projects, but it will depend on the size and complexity for the most part. Okay, in terms of limitations and conditions on market entry. So here I'll give you an overview, and later on when we have the representative of Hunt & Co, you will be provided with more details. Henry?
Thank you, Erica. An overview of the competitive environment in the BVI. There are about 10 to 12 well-established architectural firms in the BVI. By well-established, we mean outfits with qualified architects on staff, practicing for over 10 years, who also have a large number of completed projects in their portfolios. There are, in addition to those, many more small outfits in the territory. Well-established engineering firms with qualifications similar to what I mentioned for the architectural firms, fewer, so less than 10, and they are mostly structural or civil in nature. MEP engineering, which is mechanical, electrical, and plumbing design, is often outsourced in the territory. Major contractors. By major contractors, we mean contractors with experience on individual jobs over $5 million, or they have at least $10 to $15 million worth of completed projects under their belts, approximately 15 to 20 of those. And there are quite a large number, many more smaller contractors as well in the territory, ranging in size and capabilities. There are strong network connections between the competitors, and competitors are also accustomed to sourcing work from overseas. I'm sorry, I ran to slide by accident. We do not recommend that you try to push into the BVI on your own, but rather that you work with strategic partners to try and get your way into the BVI. 1 second, I'm having a bit of an issue here. My pointer. Okay. Okay, my apologies for that. So you may want to engage either with a potential joint venturing or subcontracting partner, or even with an advisor on the ground to help you to establish strong connections in the BVI or to better understand the landscape and the territory. In the territory, international building codes are normally used, which mirror European or American standards. Sometimes if you have, for example, a project that is sponsored by the Caribbean Development Bank, they may tend to side more on the European standards, but both sets of international codes are commonly used. This is a snapshot of some of the key service providers in the territory. We have some architecture, we have some engineering, we have some construction, we have some ICT providers listed in this snapshot. This slide shows some examples of capabilities of some of the AEC firms in the BVI, and try to give you an overview of how they are. Get my pointer again. This project is the cruise ship pier in the British Virgin Islands. So this is a good example I wanted to show. One of our local service providers, for example, on the initial project to build a cruise ship dock, he was a subcontractor to an international firm. But on the extension of the cruise ship dock, he actually was the main contractor. He had obviously developed his qualifications to a higher level and his experience. I was able to be the main contractor on the extension of the cruise ship dock. This project, this is our main hospital. This is the D. Orlando Smith Hospital. This project was completed by an international firm, was started by an international firm, and then completed by a local firm with partnerships overseas. That local firm, having gained some expertise in medical facility construction, was then able to complete this project, which is a mini hospital some years later on the island of Virgin Gorda. We have just some examples of some residential developments here, a completed residential development, a conceptual design of residential development here, a conceptual design for an office building. And this is a resort on one of the semi-private islands called Scrub Island, in which we had a combination of marine-based work done by local firms and also land-based work for the resort as well. In terms of our development, for example, of modeling projects, because there is some ICT, and this is a good overlap between ICT and construction. You know, we do have, and sometimes I think our service providers collaborate with others overseas, where not only do we have static models like these images that you see on the screen, but you also have 3D animations of these projects as well, which are very effective presentations. ICT, current BVI ICT capabilities. We've shared on this slide a list of some IT and media services currently provided by local firms in the BVI. We believe there is quite some overlap between services offered in both markets, which may also present opportunities for collaboration. We've listed some key service providers, but we are also, of course, very happy to assist anyone attempting to reach out to your BVI counterparts. You also have the option of reaching out directly to the BVI Commerce and Hotel Association, with whom we've put in touch with exporTT. Review of market conditions for foreign service providers. Foreign service providers may independently bid on publicly advertised projects, but we encourage you to remember to use as much knowledge on the ground as possible to assist in this regard. We recommend that you establish functional relationships with service providers in the territory. Private sector jobs in particular may not be advertised publicly. A local service provider may need specialist skills or even a large partner to complete their package, win a job, and properly execute a project. Local service providers are always looking for strategic partnerships and alliances to augment or improve their offerings. 100% of those surveyed are happy to work with T&T firms. During the interviews, however, they all indicated that there must be a good fit and that the firms out of T&T must meet their due diligence requirements. Some local service providers have a strong online presence, and you may be surprised that many of the strongest local service providers, especially in the ACT side, on the AEC side, sorry, have little or no online presence. So word of mouth and reputational strength are dominant drivers in the market. BVI firms have indicated an interest in collaborating on contracts ranging from under US$5 million to those over 50 million. And their greatest preference is for projects in the range of 10 million to 50 million, according to our survey. 1 second, sorry. Pricing trends in the marketplace. We included this slide to get you a snapshot of prices in the BVI compared to what you might be used to in T&T. The overall trend, of course, most materials prices we've found have gone up in the BVI since COVID, and we've had similar responses from T&T counterparts. Labor prices in the BVI went up after Hurricanes Irma and Maria, but have leveled off since and possibly dropped a bit with the pandemic. You can see here that prices for some craftsmen, material, and contractors. Prices for professionals, such as architects, engineers, land surveyors, quantity surveyors, project managers, attorneys, and accountants, however, is wide. And it varies depending on a number of factors. Of course, like knowledge, skill, expertise, your professional relationships with them, and of course, the volume of work you transact with those individuals or those firms. The firms are usually very happy, however, to provide pricing proposals to help you with your budgeting. Logistics in the BVI. Our main port is Port Purcell in Rotown, Tortola. We also have a second international port on the island of Virgin Gorda. Duty ranges from certain duty-free items at 0%, for example, some of the renewable energy items that we mentioned, and also some of the ICT items are also duty-free, but they range from 0 to 20%, depending on the item. Wharfage is an additional 2% on your CIF costs. Shipping lanes, we have very frequent trips of ships from Florida, Puerto Rico, and St. Thomas, and either weekly or bi-weekly from the Southern Caribbean. Our brokers in the BVI are well connected to international shipping agencies, and we have no real history of challenges with TNT. One interesting point that was mentioned is occasionally there will be some increased monitoring on cargo back and forth between TNT and the BVI, just based on your proximity to Latin America and possible narcotics trading. Documents required, your standard documents, invoices, a bill of lading or an airway bill, packing list is customary. There's what we call the online T12 customs declaration form. Those are some of the standard documents you would need to clear your items. Service providers indicated that the average time to clear goods is typically between 2 to 4 days from the date the item arrives at the port. Same-day processing and clearance is also possible in cases of great urgency or emergencies. Full container load and less than container load shipping options are available from TNT to the BVI. And of course, we have air freight and sea freight options. So thank you, and I'll hand back over to Erica.
Okay, thank you, Henry. So as I mentioned before, we'll have an attorney from Hunt & Co. who will give you some more details. But I just wanted to indicate that to set up business in the BVI, a local trade license is required. And it is actually quite difficult for foreign companies to obtain these licenses for services that are already being satisfied by local companies. So it really has to speak to something that locals are not already providing and meeting the local demand. If those needs are not being met locally, there are requirements in place in order for overseas players to qualify. So we're talking about things such as the level of experience and expertise, capitalization, the securing of local premises, and importantly, an intention to hire a certain level of local labor. And these requirements are looked on an individual basis, and so will vary from case to case. Work permits are required for non-nationals, and these are only granted once it is clearly proved that there are no locals able to fulfill the position. And you will get more information on the processes concerning trade licenses and work permits a little later. What I would like to do is to summarize the findings and the recommended market entry strategy. So in terms of business opportunities, the government procurement market is the largest for construction works. There's no explicit threshold for projects reserved for local firms or for joint venturing or partnering with BVI firms. Whilst there are no formal rules, however, in most cases, projects under $1 million are generally completed locally and are not advertised outside of the BVI. The tourism development and private housing market for high net worth clients are also significant markets. In terms of market entry strategy, We found that the most effective strategy for Trinidad and Tobago services, and in some instances, even bids provisions to the BVI, should be through joint ventures or partnerships with local companies. Moreover, local intermediaries should be engaged to guide firms through procedural requirements for setup and local business practices which have not been codified. In other words, a lot of the practices in the BVI are based on just that, practice and policy. And the reason why it is so highly recommended that you have local facilitation is that there is a real need to have someone who truly knows what the practices are and who has a very strong local network and awareness of plan developments, etc. So you should consider partnership and you should consider local facilitation. As I mentioned, in terms of regulatory requirements, there's a practice of local sourcing for construction works under $1 million and for local staffing. The availability of qualified local personnel is verified by proof of advertising. You have to advertise for at least 2 weeks. Henry just gave you some information in terms of pricing trends in the market. I think Natalie responded to some questions. Those were US dollar per day quotes in terms of the labor, but I will allow Henry the opportunity to expand on that. We confirmed that from the BVI respondents that they're interested in larger projects. And for them, that's defined as projects ranging between 10 million to 50 million US dollars. And I should note that in terms of the survey we did with the Trinidadian firms, they indicated a slightly lower level of project value, but nonetheless, there seems to be a significant area of overlap and opportunity for collaboration. So at this point, Henry, I don't know if we should take some questions now or if Paul is here and we should turn over to Paul.
Yes, I think we can take some questions. Paul, if you're here, maybe you could raise your hand because I was looking for your name in the list. I hadn't seen it as yet. But let's take some questions, I think, for now, Erica. First of all, on the prices that we listed, yes, you're correct. Those are all in US dollars per day for those labor rates. We also reached out to some TNT companies, and they did indicate to us that your prices, they have been moving a lot, especially on material since COVID, which we've seen in the BVI. So those are currently our approximate numbers on per day costs in the BVI. So we can take some questions until we get notice that Paul is ready.
Hi, everyone. You guys can put the questions in the chat and we'll answer.
Henry, there was also a request for information in terms of the names of firms and being able to get in contact with them for the various sectors. I know you presented a slide with some, information, broadly speaking, in terms of these are some of the firms with their logos. And I know we will be speaking with a couple of them shortly, but I don't know if you wanted to mention a bit more about some of the key players and how contact can be made, etc.
Sure. Was there a a question specifically on either the AE side or ICT side at first, or should I address both?
Well, I'm trying to scroll through and I can't find it right now, but I guess you can speak to, okay, here it is. Could you share the names of the architectural firms and engineering firms? And the person also, she also shared her contact information, which we should note in terms of sharing it with them. So I guess the question was specifically for architects and engineers. And I should just love to say that Henry is also an engineer.
Yes, I'm an electrical engineer by training. So we are happy to, if you go through exporTT, they'll be in contact with us at all times. So if you ever have questions, you can go through exporTT. They have our contact information. They can get information to you on service providers in any of the industries. We've also introduced exporTT to the BVI Chamber of Commerce and Hotel Association. And they are going to be a great resource for you as well in finding sources for collaboration. In this graphic, RDP, Roger Downing Partners, they are an architectural firm in Rhoden. OBMI, they are also an architectural firm based in Rhoden, which, they have a good website presence, I think, both of these companies. AR Potter, architectural firm, AR Potter and Associates. STO Enterprises, they are also an architectural firm, and also AR Potter. Both have started as architectural firms, and they are now full service firms providing architecture, design, as well as even construction or construction management if required. KDL Designs, another architectural firms, Tiger Key Architecture. Let me see what else we have on here for architecture. Anchor Design Studio is a smaller architectural firm. So we have quite a few of them, and I'm going to get in trouble for missing someone, but quite a few architectural firms here, and we're happy to provide you with a list and some email addresses if you'd like on those. Engineering firms, the main one I've listed here is Systems Engineering, and they are structural and civil engineers primarily. So I think that answers the question from that regard. Yeah, but this is not an exhaustive list by any means. And yeah, I know some of my colleagues in the BVI are going to crucify me for missing out on some of their companies, but this is just to give you an idea of some of the firms in the BVI in that regard.
Okay, thanks, Henry.
Any other questions?
We have a question from Angelique. What was the second port of entry?
The second port of entry is a smaller port on the island of Virgin Gorda. I mentioned the BVI has 60 islands and keys, and we have essentially 4 main islands. The 4 main islands are Tortola, Virgin Gorda, Jost van Dyke, and Anegada. And the second port of entry is in the valley or Spanish Town on the island of Virgin Gorda. There are, of course, airport entry, is of course as well airport entry through the Terence B. Lettsome International Airport for air freight.
Okay, thank you. And I'm seeing another question from Jay Watson Vincent. I'm interested in knowing how to contact these firms and to have some sort of introduction. I actually believe Natalie had answered that earlier in the chat. She was saying to go through the Chamber of Commerce. I don't know if you all have anything other to add to that.
Sure, yes. Yeah, so the Chamber may just list, I'm not sure the Chamber will provide you with an exhaustive list of all providers that they can come up with, or it'll be their members, because there'll also be some firms that aren't in there. So I would strongly agree with going through the Chamber. And I would also suggest just, you can get our contact information through Kenika at exporTT, and we're happy to provide you with a list of whichever sector companies you'd like to contact and their email addresses, perhaps phone numbers, and even facilitate an introduction. If you'd like to do a conference call with one of them, we can call them, ensure that they're interested. And we are very happy to arrange a conference call with you as an introduction with any of the providers as well.
Okay, thanks. And another question. I would like to collaborate with local firms to do climate change adaptation and mitigation projects that are badly needed for the BVI development. So
Right.
I suppose they're asking what's the best way to go about that?
So the climate change arm in the government is under the Department of Conservation. And the person who is directly responsible for that, I can get your contact. I can get you her contact information so that you can get in contact with her, her directly. There are some projects that will come up for bid, for example, under the RDA or the government. And whether this is in consultancy services or even infrastructure projects, you can look out for. But that is a very good point. They are badly needed in the BVI and the rest of the territory. And you know, we can put you in contact with the right person. The person I'm thinking about is Stacy Ann Austin at Department of Conservation and Fisheries. She's the person now heading up the climate change adaptation work. And we also have, you know, someone, her predecessor as well, who's actually now working in St. Lucia in that space, who we can put you in contact with as well. So we have a number of persons depending on how you would like to enter and how you'd like to make your initial introductions and queries. There are a few different people we can help you to get in contact with in that regard.
Okay, another question from Gemstat. Will TT contractors be coming as subcontractors?
Great question. You have, that's what you'd have the option. So, and BVI firms have indicated they have experience and willingness to work in multiple different arrangements. So you may have a situation where if you are, let's say, a major or a specialist contractor in an area where BVI doesn't have expertise. So let's say, for example, when the hospital was first built, or even let's say the power station or a bridge, a major bridge in the BVI, you could come in as the main contractor and then have a BVI company as your subcontractor. That's one option. You could come in where it's a joint venture, where you are more or less equal partners. Or you could come in as a subcontractor, whereas, and I know that's happened as well, where, let's say, for example, even the power station, where you have an international or a BVI contractor as the main contractor, and most of the welding and fabrication, they hired a firm out of Trinidad and Tobago to come in as the subcontractor. So you can, depending on the size of your company, your area specialization and the project, there's scope to come in at any of those levels. And from our survey, all of the companies in the BVI have indicated, or most of them have indicated, that they are willing to work with you at any level, depending on the project.
Okay, thank you.
Henry, I just wanted to, if you don't mind my intervention, to
Of course not.
Give a bit more information in terms of the SWOT analysis that was undertaken and the challenges that would have to be mitigated by Trinidadian firms entering the BVI. So in terms of the BVI as an export destination, the strengths are there is a good network of international law firms, agents, and project managers available. There's a high level of experience of BVI professionals in terms of managing international partnerships. In terms of the UK, there is a strong familiarity with the UK legal system and BVI UK procedural efficiency in some areas. As we've mentioned, there's a variety in terms of the type and size of construction projects. The multiple international building codes are used in the BVI. There is financing available for joint initiatives. It's a tax neutral jurisdiction. There's a high level of compliance with international financial and accounting best practices. And there's some more strengths, but in terms of weaknesses, A local presence, and this is something we didn't speak on, and I suppose would be of interest specifically for ICT providers. For remote service supply, you still need to have a local presence. You have to address the broad local hiring requirements. There's limited searchable labor market information available. There is no automatic rate of stay for executives, key personnel, and management of investors. And shipping costs, especially, with COVID, can be pretty high. In terms of opportunities, so especially for Trinidadian firms, there's an opportunity for oil and gas engineering services to match the gap that currently exists in those areas in the BVI. There has been an indication that there's a need for mechanical engineering services. There is a demand for construction material. I saw some questions raised to Natalie in that regard. There is demand for specialized ICT services. And in terms of threats, I mentioned before that there are a lot of practices, informal practices, and there is some degree of discretion that is applied in terms of business approval and procurement practices. More recently, especially, you've had supply chain disruption for material and material price escalation. And of course, you have the fact that there's some vulnerabilities given the geographical location of the BVI. In terms of the challenges which Trinidadian firms will have to mitigate in entering the BVI, you have to consider the cultural context of the BVI and possible misunderstandings. Maybe some issues in terms of the entry procedure and the movement of persons as it speaks to being able to get work permits, the ability to successfully negotiate with government, and in terms of Trinidadian firms generally accessing new markets, this is more general things like considering the timelines of customs and time to clear goods, receiving invitations to bid, and the cost of mobilization from Trinidad and Tobago. So those were just some of the challenges to be mitigated. I wanted to summarize along with the findings of the SWOT. So I'll turn it back over to Henry. And Henry, when you're finished, I note that Paul has entered the meeting. So just a reminder, Paul will be providing even more detailed information in terms of market entry and the legal environment.
Okay, thank you, Eric. I was just going to mention the same thing to you, that I see Paul is now in the meeting room and he has been promoted to co-host. So Paul, you should be able to share your screen if you are ready, and able to do that now. If any challenges, I have a copy of your presentation. You can let me know and I'll share it for you. So Erica, if you'd like to move on.
Before Paul, okay, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say if you'd like to introduce Paul or if there's anything else to add on.
Yes. Sorry. So I actually have I don't know if I should share it, but I have a small slide I can share. First, now it's not showing. 1 second. It was there. No, it isn't. Anyway, Paul is with Hunt & Co. Hunt & Co. is a small firm, law firm in the BVI, which offers concierge services to clients. It is highly experienced in terms of facilitating foreign companies seeking to enter the market. Wait 1 second. I think it's popped up. I am sorry, I really would need to share. I'll come back to it. Oh, 1 second. That's it. Okay, here we go. So, sorry about that. So Hunt & Co. It offers a concierge service to clients, and it is highly connected. As I mentioned, having that network in the BVI is key. And it has a wide practice area, including banking and finance, economic substance compliance, intellectual property law, local business and policy, and shipping and maritime, amongst others.
Okay.
But I will.
Sorry to cut you off. Yeah, you are showing a black screen, so I can show the information either now or in the future if you'd like to.
It's not. Oh, I'm sorry. On my end, it's showing as shared. All right. Well, I apologize about that. But anyway, I will now turn you over to Paul. Henry, I think you should share in the future. Thank you.
Sure. I will.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to the presentation. I must apologize for only just coming in. I had a client call, and it was with a client in the UK. So there's a time difference to contend with, and based upon their availability, I was only able to meet with them very early, and I only recently came out of that meeting. So I'm sorry about that. Now, in terms of my screen being shared, I saw a message from one of the one of the viewers that they're not able to see the screen. Are they able to see it now? Should I share my screen? How do you wish to do that? You're muted.
Sorry. Try and share your screen now, Paul.
Okay. All right. So I will do that. Share screen. Share. Well, I think
we're seeing it, Paul.
You're seeing it right now. Okay. So
we're seeing
So let me go ahead and click that. Okay, we're good. All right. So just some more details about my background. I am a senior associate at Hunt & Co. I joined the firm in 2019, I believe right before the summer of 2019, and my specialized area is in litigation, be it civil litigation or commercial litigation. Prior to my employment at Hunt & Co., I worked at a law firm in Jamaica that dealt almost exclusively in litigation matters, particularly in civil litigation matters. And I was recognized as the most senior associate there at that time. And I was involved regularly in obtaining multi-million-dollar judgments for my clients. So I brought a certain amount of litigation experience to Hunt & Co. Now, in terms of my presentation, I was assisted so gracefully by my managing partner, Miss Laura Arthur, and as you can see, her presentation skills far exceeds mine. So all of this is there for your viewing and consumption. But This is how I will go through my presentation. I'll deal with the background and the history of the BVI. I'm pretty sure that that would have been said somewhat, or some information would have been given in respect to that before I came on. But for my own sake, I have to deal with things in this way. I'll deal with the whole issue of a belonger, who is a belonger, versus who is a BVI lander, sorry. And that's a very important point to know, and their rights consequent to the fact that they have that status. Also, we will be dealing with registration of a business in the BVI. What are some of the things that you will need to expect and look out for in anticipation of registering a business here? Contracts and operations just generally. So if you are registered, what are some of the things that you would have to be mindful of as a business and as a company here doing business? And I'll touch a bit on the legal fees. It's very important to know, especially in terms of just being able to be aware and in order to protect yourself on that legal side. And then I'll just go ahead and give a summary of what I've said. And even though it's not there, I have been informed that I have some time to take some questions. I will be guided by the chairperson as it relates to that process. And without further ado, let's go in, let's dive in. Let me just move this mini screen before. Okay, so the British Virgin Islands, the BVI, is a small archipelago of approximately 60 islands and keys. And as the name suggests, it is an overseas territory of Great Britain. And it has a population of approximately or roughly over 32,000 people. And despite its small size and parochial appearance, there's a lot of beaches here, very, very lovely beaches. And the presence of only 3 stoplights, it's home to the Caribbean's most robust financial activity, with over 1 million registered corporate vehicles, limited partnership, trusts, and other financial structures. Now, it's important to know that in the BVI, income tax is rated at 0. So that means that there is no tax on your income. However, there is something which we refer to as payroll tax, which an employer and an employee are statutorily required to pay. If you are an individual in the BVI and you do not work, there is no tax that you have to pay just being a resident here. Self-employed persons and employers and employees are required, as I said, required to make those payroll tax and also contribution to the National Health Insurance Scheme and Social Security. So those are your statutory payments. Now, in terms of the territory as a democracy, I would submit that the territory is on par with first world democracies. It has a duly elected House of Assembly. It has a very, very active government and an equally active opposition. And I would dare say a first-class judiciary. Not that I'm biased because I'm practicing here, but I found that the judiciary here practices or executes the law at a very high level. Now, in the BVI, it is home to the famed commercial court. Anyone that has any experience in the legal circles in the Caribbean or in the Eastern Caribbean would be aware of the BVI Commercial Court. That is also a signatory of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court. So even though the BVI stands alone in much respects in terms of its participation as an Eastern Caribbean country, it does sign on to the Eastern Caribbean Court and the rules thereof in terms of how decisions are made. And that's very important to know, so that for the point of, or for the sake of consistency, you can always hope that whatever is said in the Eastern Caribbean in terms of the law, it will also be reflected and recognized in the BVI. Now, in terms of the commercial court, you have to be a pretty heavyweight individual to be practicing or having your matter settled there, as the claims cannot value less than $500,000 US. That's the limit in order to go to the commercial court. As it's a far cry from where I'm coming from in Jamaica, where in order to appear in the high court, the limit would have been $1 million Jamaican dollars, which quite frankly amounts to about 8 or 9,000 US dollars. So there you can see how the discrepancy in terms of the courts, even in another Caribbean country. Now, the territory is modern and or has a modern and very stylistic arbitration center, and its new labor tribunal appears to be hitting all the right strides with timely and thorough decisions. Now, in terms of the Territory's Financial Services Commission, it is recognized as one of the leaders in the region and has very capable laws protecting intellectual property. I think anyone that is interested in having a service or operating a service in the BVI would be glad to know that the financial services industry is of that high standard, and that there would be protections there in terms of their intellectual property rights. Now, the Constitution, the BVI Constitution, was passed in 2007, and even though that is of some vintage, not quite as vintage as some other territories, but for the BVI, it's very comforting to note that the Parliament is currently discussing amendments and changes to that BVI Constitution to recognize more current and ideas and happenings and developments. So there is an active consideration being applied to the BVI's constitution, regardless of the fact that it was just only changed in 2007. Now, there is also an acknowledgement of fundamental human rights here, so there's no concern as it relates to the protection of your human rights when you're in the BVI. Now, moving on, I said that I would go into the definitions of who is a belonger and a BVI lander, and I will do so right now. Now, a citizen in the BVI is known as a British Overseas Territory Citizen, or BOTC. They're essentially British citizens, and they have a right to hold a British passport and to work in the United Kingdom. That's because of their status. Now, in addition to the citizenship, there are two categories. One is the BVI lander, and the other category is deemed a belonger, who is a person who is has a belonger status to the territory. Now, a BVI lander has native ties to the territory with at least one grandparent having been born in the territory. And the definition of a belonger is much more complex, and that is set out in the Article 2.2 of the Constitution. Now, belonger status can be obtained by descent or marriage. It also can be obtained by acquiring residency through immigration. Now, the two forms or the two statuses overlap to some degree, and it is also possible to become a belonger without being a BVI lander. And I think that for the purposes of this seminar, it's very important to know that a non-belonger is a person who is not a belonger or a BVI lander, and that has a very important ramification in a person's rights and their duties. Now, in terms of a belonger or a BVI lander, they have an automatic right to work in the territory, and that's a protection that they have by virtue of their status. Non-belongers, as a rule, they need to obtain a work permit in order to work here in the BVI. Now, a work permit will not be issued to a person where a qualified belonger is available and willing to be employed to the position in question. And for this reason, you have the need for an employer who is advertising, who wishes to fill a vacancy in a position, to advertise that position in the local newspaper of general circulation for at least 2 weeks in order to prove for their own applicant that the position was advertised, the position was available, no belonger or BVI lander made it known that they were interested. And so as a result, this non-belonger applied and was successful, and it is requested that they be issued a work permit. However, if there is a situation where a belonger applies for the job, that belonger has a preference in terms of fulfilling that role as a right. Now, that being settled, let's go on, move on to registration of a business in a BVI. Now, the BVI government protects local enterprises. And for example, there are no KFCs here, no McDonald's, no Starbucks. You won't find any like international franchises here. Most of the businesses, particularly retail and food and beverage, are locally owned, locally produced. In the BVI though, the BVI government is keen on welcoming foreign investors, and legislation is currently being tabled that will provide lucrative incentives for foreign investment. That's something that I think the exporTT will be very interested in knowing, that in the coming days there would be more discussions in terms of what are these initiatives that are facilitated by the BVI government, which welcomes foreign investors. Now, an individual or entity needing or seeking to conduct business in the BVI must secure a trade license from the Trade Department. That's very important. The government's website is very helpful in assisting applicants to provide the requisite documentations and information to for the purposes of the application. This is where it gets a bit it gets a bit sensitive in the sense that there is no written rules which guides a practitioner or which guides a applicant. Now, the government website does not have information regarding the general principles that guide an applicant in terms of the rate of success for their application to be issued a trade license. However, we have seen, and it is the very, let us say it is the very considered trend that a foreign applicant who requests a trade license has a greater chance of receiving approval if they have partnered with a BVI lander or a belonger. That is something that we've seen as a trend. It is as good as a convention, really. Now, in terms of the areas of agriculture, construction, and engineering, there are no express policies which guides the Trade Department in what they require when an application is coming from that side. Now, the Trade Department has the discretion generally to request any documentation that they need. So it would be expected that a person who is practicing in these areas would be expected to provide certifications, international certifications, something that which showed their work experience, their qualification, things to that nature. Now, in terms of the telecommunication industry, if it is that you intend to operate in that industry, you need to seek a special license from the Telecommunications Regulatory Commission. That's very important. That's a difference where, in terms of those applicants, they need to go to the Telecommunications Regulatory Commission, get a license there, and then they'll be able to apply for a trade license. Now, we will always encourage our clients who are considering business opportunities in the BVI to engage reputable and connected local consultants who can help to navigate the myriad norms and policies and match foreign applicants for businesses with BVI landers and belongers and as partners. This is something that was touched on earlier. Your ability to have a very strong network in terms of your partners, your associates, increases your chances, it increases your odds in thriving here in the BVI, as well as getting that status of being able to operate here in the BVI. Now, quite quickly, we will move to contracts and operations. So you're set up in the BVI. What are some of the things that you should be looking for? Now, in terms of operators in the BVI, all operators in the BVI are encouraged to use BVI corporate vehicles to operate their business, right? You just have more protections if you're registered here as a BVI entity or BVI corporate entities, I should say. Now, the BVI offers a wide range of corporate entities and partnerships. The limited liability companies, where liability is limited by shares, is the most common. So much of how in other countries, there are corporate structures and vehicles to facilitate business operations. We in the BVI, we have a very modern landscape where that is concerned, and you won't be found wanting in terms of your choices or the amount or the options to properly ensure that your business has the proper vehicle to operate. Now, in terms of business and investment arrangements between local and foreign partners, they're typically governed by what we call joint venture structures, right? And you need a lawyer to assist in the drafting of that, drafting and vetting of that document. It is advised that you use a BVI lawyer to do so. Now, our law firm in particular has expertise in structuring these types of agreement for local businesses and cross-border transactions over a variety of disciplines and industries. And on the transactional side, there's a lot of cross-border contract work, which includes contracts for foreign governments, entities, and individuals. So our work, practically speaking, has included a joint venture for BVI contractor partnering with a foreign company for the construction of the Orlando Smith Hospital on Tortola. That's the largest hospital here, and the renovation of Little Dix Bay Resort in Virgin Gorda. There's also work done in the negotiation of a contract with the government of Antigua on behalf of the BVI company engaged to work on a quarry. Also, we have worked on advising on the financing structures for a network of BVI companies carrying out mining operations in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So we can see the range in which we have handled these type of matters. Now, our attorneys, now feels like tooting our horns here, you know, but I will proceed. Our attorneys have had decades of experience both regionally and locally. And as a smaller firm, we have positioned ourselves, or we can position ourselves to set more affordable prices and have different price points, which larger firms cannot afford to do. We have less rent, we can charge less. Our flexibility and autonomy allows us to quote very competitively. It is important, though, to consider that our fees ultimately depends on certain variables which are specific to the matter in which it is concerned. So quotations are normally given on a case-by-case basis. There's obviously standards for, you know, very ordinary matters. However, the more specific a matter gets, the less you will find that there can be a sort of standard cost being given. Now, in terms of a commercial matter, those matters are usually handled on a retainer. So there's a general assessment of how much the matter will cost, and then a portion of that cost is set as a retainer and goes to the client trust account, which does not belong to the lawyer, but allows the lawyer to work in an environment where they're not constantly consulting the client in terms of filings and in terms of documentations. Obviously, everything has to be on the instructions of the client, but it provides the certainty that the lawyer can work effectively because money is there to do so. Now, we adhere to local and international standards of compliance and or know your clients, or KYC principles are very high. I think I have gone well over my 15 minutes looking at my clock. However, I'll just summarize right now. So much of the BVI marketplace will not be set out in the BVI statute. We recommend hiring a team of professionals, local consultants, attorneys, accountants who are well versed in BVI policies and practices to assist in navigating the business landscape, including obtaining trade license, work permits, other business registration, for example, social security, payroll tax, and national health insurance. And I touched on work permits earlier. Now, compliance, it is also important to have those personnel to ensure that you have proper compliance with the regulatory requirements. So notwithstanding the fact that within this marketplace, there aren't all the steps that are found in statute, there is a constant need to ensure that with the practices, with the conventions, with the rules and law, you have a team who are able and very well equipped to ensure that you will not fall foul of any of these items. Having representatives on the ground in the BVI who are fully abreast of the changes in practice and regulations, who have cultivated a broad and top-tier network will be invaluable, right? So that's just basically just summarizing what I have said earlier. Now, I would like to thank you for your time. I know I overshot my 15-minute allowance, but I think I tried to get through it as quickly as I could. And subject to the chairman's process, I will be available for questions regarding whatever I have said. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. There are some, sorry, Henry.
No, go ahead, Erica. Go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I saw a couple questions there in the chat.
Okay.
So maybe you can address them.
Yeah, I could help with that. So Paul, don't worry on the time. You were very good, actually, perfect timing, I think. A couple of the questions I see here in the chat is, what is the time for obtaining trade licenses?
So in terms of trade licenses, it's very hard to set down a specific time frame because it all will depend on the specific documentation required. The policy is that once you have applied for the trade license, the trade department will get back to you in 3 days as it relates to any other documentation which is required. Now, obviously that will depend on the applicant when they produce those documentation. However, there is a 6-week to 3-month period from that point to the approval of the application. So that's to give you some context. However, you know, because it's a case-by-case basis, it's hard to just pinpoint one time period to say, okay, this is when you'll get this license by versus this license. It all depends on the circumstances.
Yeah, yes, I concur with that sentiment. There is quite a range of time that it could take depending on documentation that you've produced, the time it's taken, the position that's being recruited for, how you've advertised, numerous factors. So it does pay to have somebody who knows the process, as you said, and who has even connections within the different departments to be able to help you to follow up on those matters.
Yes. Well said.
Second question, which we've heard a lot during this process, is there a scale of fees for attorneys in the BVI?
So yes, there is a scale of fees in the BVI for attorneys, but I'll emphasize that scale relates to when a bill is being assessed by the court. There is a freedom of contract rule here at common law, which dictates how agreements can go, and it applies to clients and attorneys as well, right? However, if a client is dissatisfied with, in particularly a litigation matter, with the bill that has been produced by their attorney, they can apply to the court to have that bill considered along that scale, right? So it's difficult to say that scale applies across the board. It applies to a specific instance. A client can obviously go to that scale and say, okay, could you charge me against that scale? But it's not something that the lawyer is mandated to do if it is a private matter and not a litigation matter per se.
Okay, and I noticed that one of our colleagues, Laura Arthur, also commented on. So Laura, would you like to unmute yourself and provide a little bit of color on what Paul just mentioned?
Actually, it is not directly related to what Paul was saying.
Okay.
Just an
okay. So she just just an FYI
Laura
that you do have the ability.
Speak to the point
Go ahead,
because I think it's important.
Okay. Earlier in the presentation, Paul would have mentioned that it's advisable, and I concur, to register a company if you're going to conduct business in the BVI. I wanted to mention that there's also the ability to register a foreign company. So if you have your own TNT entity operating in Trinidad or Tobago, and you want to keep that entity and expand your business to the BVI through the means Paul would have discussed, you can register that foreign company as a company to do business in the BVI.
Thank you for that, Laura.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Paul, as well, a point of clarification.
Okay.
We do have quite a few ICT firms on the call. Some may be involved in something, for example, along the lines of website and e-commerce design. And we were told that even if you're not practicing physically in the BVI, you may need a trade license. I don't know if that's clear. And from a legal perspective, what's your point of view on that? Let's say an IT provider based in Trinidad and Tobago who may want to do business with a BVI firm.
So could I get, I'm just going to seek some more clarity on the nature of the transaction. So the ICT professional would be doing work for a BVI client, or is it the ICT service would be offering services in the BVI?
No, the first option is what I was thinking about. Okay,
so if it is that an ICT company is offering a service to a BVI client, I don't, at the risk of not necessarily having properly researched this particular question, I wouldn't see how the BVI laws would be applicable to that transaction, because you are having a situation where that ICT provider is providing a service from their host country. The issue becomes a bit more unclear if it is that the ICT provider intends to essentially provide services in the BVI and it is marketed as such, right? As opposed to a client in the BVI requesting for what work to be done on a particular matter that perhaps is relevant in the BVI, but is being done outside by an outside entity. But
okay,
for the avoidance of the complication, I would recommend that if the situation is going to be prolonged, and there may be significant overlaps and significant confusion between if the work is being done in the BVI, then I would recommend that the ICT provider regularize that situation. So the answer isn't as clear cut, to be quite honest. However, for one-off instances where, for example, just some work is being required outside, then I wouldn't believe that that is necessarily according to BVI law, but then because if it becomes more involved and there is the possibility that this allegation is, okay, you're practicing work in relation to the BVI, then that now seems to require some sort of regulation.
Okay, thank you. That actually does clear it up for me from the two perspectives you mentioned, and even a third one where it could appear that you are constantly trading in the BVI.
Yes.
So
yes,
thank you for that, Paul. I see Natalie's hand up.
Thank you, Henry, and thank you, Paul, for the presentation. I want to just jump on the last point on the ICT firm, which is really interesting. The firm providing services from Trinidad and Tobago into the BVI. I'm hearing the suggestion that there is nothing that, there isn't a limitation on a firm in the BVI purchasing ICT services from outside of the BVI. I just wanted you to comment on that specifically, and there is nothing that may require data to be stored in the BVI where in relation to ICT services or files to be housed on servers in the BVI.
Thank you for your question, Natalie. Now, the situation is very technical. Let me say that, right? Because if the factors are that the ICT provider will be doing work, which essentially will constitute a service being offered in the BVI, then that is a situation that I believe would be covered by our laws, right? Now, because the type of actual work isn't being discussed, or we aren't getting as specific to say, okay, what is the actual service being provided? It's very difficult to comment on whether or not that would be captured versus not captured, right? Because it really does depend on the nature of the service being provided. But I would say safely that in order to avoid those questions, it may be more desirable for safer for a provider to, considering the nature of what they are doing, apply at the very least for a registration of a BVI company and a trade license. That would be obviously the much safer route if particularly the relationship will be a prolonged one, right? Now, in terms of the data protection and the data requirements that's covered under an act here, it's a very long act, and if it is that the company has a prolonged relationship and obviously is registered in the BVI or has a trade license to operate in the BVI, that act would be applicable, which would require obviously the protection and the storage of data.
Okay, thank you, Paul. In the interest of time, as we said before, we have the opportunity to hear directly from industry players. So as useful as you are, Paul, we would ask that you allow for Mr. Rhoden, Percy, and Mr. Stoutt, Dion to join the session. And to share with participants. There are some questions we have for them, but first I'll ask Percy and then Dion to give us a little background about themselves, their business, you know, how they've developed their businesses, their accomplishments, etc. So I'll start with Percy of Meridien Construction. Thank you.
Sorry, would you like, well, let me introduce you, Percy, as well. We have a brief introduction of you, I think, which is on the screen. So Percy Rhoden is the president of Meridien Construction. Their services include construction, civil engineering, including marine, and many other services, which Percy will tell us about. They are known primarily for commercial projects, and they started in the BVI in 1995. Most of their work was initially focused in the BVI and USVI. They have expanded very much more throughout the region in recent years. And I will allow Percy to say a bit more. Percy, are you unmuted and can you speak?
Can you hear me now?
Sure, we can hear you now.
Okay, I think you have summarized the whole thing, so I know Morning, guys. I'm sorry about the lateness. Just had some technical difficulties with the computer. I had to run from one area to another to be able to be on this call. Percy Rhoden, President and CEO of the Meridien Construction. We started back in 1995, a little over 25 years ago, when we set up shop in the BVI under the umbrella Meridien Construction Company Limited. We then concentrated pretty much on projects within the BVI and neighboring islands of the USVI, etc., which kept us quite busy over the years. And later on, we decided, and this is pretty much, we deal with marine construction, which is one of our specialties, foundations, and vertical construction, which has to do with civil engineering, buildings, including commercial buildings, power stations, of which we have done several of those. We're a design-build construction company, and we pride ourselves on getting the job done within budget and on time. And pretty much we continue to do that, throughout. A few years ago, well, it's probably about 6 years ago, 5-6 years ago, we embarked on a project, a capital project in the BVI, which is construct the cruise ship dock. And of course, you have several other big international companies that have been on the job. We are there. So I think we did well by outbidding them because we're local and have the capacity and the capability to construct the job that magnitude, which we did. After that, we started getting calls. Earlier I said we pretty much concentrated only in the BVI and as far as the US Virgin Islands. Then we started moving, we moved to different jurisdictions and did a couple of cruise ship docks in Antigua. We're now in probably about 4 different islands, constructing and doing foundations. Right now I'm in St. Lucia, just to oversee a job that is the new terminal building in Viewfort, which we're doing this foundation, the slab, which is over 3,000 piles, and there are different types of piling systems. We're in Antigua, where one of our companies, we have a few companies, one of them has to do with dredging, and we're dredging over 250,000 cubic meters of stuff from within the turning basin to accommodate, make sure that we will be able to accommodate the largest floating vessel, which is Oasis class, into the harbor of Antigua and Barbuda. We currently probably employed a little over 200 people between the islands of BVI, Antigua, St. Lucia, and now we are stretched over in Anguilla for a few small jobs. And we continue to work the best as we can within the different jurisdictions. Our regional office is based in Antigua, and we have quite a few jobs going on in Antigua. We have been amenable to partner with other companies which have approached us. And we, as I said in the previous meeting with you guys a couple of weeks ago, I, definitely have, interest in moving forward with other companies if that arises and it presents itself to join venture with other bigger companies within the Caribbean, so we can explore that and move ahead. So in a nutshell, that's where we are as Meridien.
Okay, thank you very much, Percy. Let me, before we get into any question and answer with you, let me also introduce Mr. Dion Stoutt, who is also on the call as well, so we can have a little discussion with you both. Dion, if you could unmute your mic while I introduce you. Dion Stoutt is the Managing Director of STO Enterprises. He is an architect by trade, and STO is a full-service architectural and quantity surveying company, which was formed in the year 2000. So they just recently celebrated 20 years of service to the BVI territory within the past year or so. The firm focuses on high-end residential and commercial projects. But I'd let Dion also introduce himself and tell us a bit more about STO Enterprises.
Good morning, and thank you, Henry, for the introduction. STO Enterprise, full service architectural project management quantity surveying company. We've been established in the BVI and we work primarily in the BVI now for 20 years. Our focus is obviously design, but more high-end residential commercial projects. In terms of project management, we'll be leaning towards more of the higher end. One of the projects that Percy mentioned, the cruise ship pier, we were the project managers for that project. So we worked hand in hand with Percy on that. And I must say, as two local firms, being able to execute one of the largest, if not the biggest project ever executed in BVI history. So you have two local persons, myself and Percy, were part of that. So congratulations to Percy. We too, like Percy said, are always amicable to teaming up with persons, other companies, especially if they're bringing a level of expertise that we don't have. I have partners in other islands within the Caribbean. I have partners in Aruba. I have partners in the Cayman. And I also have ventured out and done a little consulting in Nevis. But as far as me moving around the Caribbean and doing things, I would quicker partner with somebody else who would be in that location, and then we would do some sort of joint venture to move any project of any magnitude forward.
Okay, thank you, Dion. So how we will work through this section, Erica and I will essentially moderate the discussion, and we have some questions for you. I would say, Dion, to your point that you just made, yeah, I do commend yourself and Percy on. You mentioned the cruise ship project, and even for those on this call, I know there'll be firms with various levels of experience. These guys are both great examples. I can speak to Percy. I was in the power industry for a long time as well, and I believe in Percy, you mentioned working at a power station, came in as probably a manager for the project a few decades ago. Then he moved up to being he owned his own company, became a subcontractor on that project, similarly on the cruise pier project. And then, as I mentioned to you, on the last expansion, he was the main contractor on the project. So, the firms in the BVI over the last 3 decades or so have really grown in their competence and skill levels. And to the point now that they are, being called on to export their services throughout the region, which is similar to what other TNT firms are trying to to establish that relationship with the BVI and help us to fill gaps in the BVI as well. So Erica, do you have any questions or comments for Percy and Dion?
Yes, I do. I wanted to, first of all, thank you for joining us, but I wanted to know what were examples of some of the specific complementary skills and resources that you would be looking for in terms of a partner. I know you, especially, I think Percy does a lot in-house, but in terms of complementary or needed skills and resources that would be of specific interest to you, could you elaborate a bit, please?
Okay. Dion, you want me to go? I'll go first. Look, one of the problems that we have, as I would refer to us as small companies, is the ability to bond larger projects. That is pretty much the stumbling block for us. As it relates to the technicalities surrounding these projects that we bid on and we can work with, we can execute them without any problems. We have the equipment, we have the manpower, we have pretty much most of what is needed to do these projects. I can't say we're not the best at it, but if we were able to align ourselves with larger companies, whether it's out of Trinidad or it's out of Europe, the US or Canada, Jamaica, we could be extremely effective, I must say. Let's look at Trinidad, for example. Trinidad, probably got seriously large equipment and expertise that pretty much even a lot of my technical help are people out of Trinidad. And we use that market because of the marine, the oil wells, the crane operators, those people that are seasoned in the business to come over to help us to construct our projects. So, with that said, our biggest problem is bonding a project. That's pretty much it.
Thank you, Dion.
I concur with what Percy said. The projects in the BVI moving forward, they're all going to be over $25 million. As a small developing country, there's only so much $25 million projects that has been done in the past in the BVI. So, and they all require expertise in bonding or have done a project of that magnitude. So we would need persons who have done projects of that size or more in order to partner with us for the bonding and for the experience, just to pre-qualify for certain projects. But from my, specifically to my business, I would say engineering, MEP engineering, that's one area in the BVI that is lacking. I outsource all my MEP engineering or even my structural engineering. I don't have in-house structural engineers, I outsource that. So from an engineering standpoint, if I want to build my business, make it stronger, more competitive in other areas, I would have to get expert engineering to work with me.
Okay, thank you. Those are some of the findings that came out of the survey as well. Interestingly, Percy, we did ask the question about bonding, and I was somewhat surprised at the responses because the responses even from the BVI was saying that bonding isn't too much of a challenge. So I think what you were doing is you were looking ahead for the bigger projects, you and Dion, looking ahead to the bigger projects and the bonding required for those. You have no issue with bonding for your current projects, but you're looking for the bigger ones. And likewise, at TNT, they said they had no issue with bonding at the time. So looking ahead, I think that's a great point, and I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, as I said, we're amenable to joint venture with. See, some of the bigger jobs, we don't even bother to go after them because it entails a substantial amount of outlay of cash, or it has to be insured where bonding is concerned. So that is why you partner with people, and the upfront expense that it demands is huge, you know. So projects over $30–50 million, you're looking at with a heavy outlay of cash, or however you bond it, and that is a criteria that you have to meet. If you don't meet it, you're not qualified for the project. So yes, if there are some Trinidadian companies that want to be involved in this part of the Caribbean where Dion and I are, from the BVI back down to the Eastern Caribbean, within those areas, we'd be willing to take a look at it for sure.
Okay, I think I know your experiences have run the gambit on this question, but is there a specific form of collaboration that you guys prefer, whether from JV to partnerships to subcontracting, either you being the subcontractor or you subcontracting other firms? I can start with Dion this time. Is there a type of arrangement that you prefer more?
I think joint ventures work well, Henry. I've done quite a few of those, and I'm happy with those because, and I don't want to speak for Percy, but we're quite capable of putting skin in the game. So we don't want to bring somebody in where they think they have to do something and we're just the smaller piece of the puzzle. We're going to bring our fair share. So a joint venture, I think, would be the best option for me where I'm at with my company at the moment.
Okay, Percy.
Well, if you look at the project that we go after, currently there are substantial projects. So we talk about skin in the game. We will do whatever is possible to move in and partner with someone. We have quite a bit of equipment. I mean, millions of dollars worth of equipment. So that could be our skin in the game if we went in with a partner, right? And then they could bond the project. But right now we're working with I think I can remember this. It's probably $18 million project down here in St. Lucia, which would probably ramped up to maybe another couple of million, 2 or 3 million, so maybe over $20 million. We're actually a subcontractor to the main contractor. When we bid the project, there was a company out of Jamaica, one out of Trinidad, one out of Barbados that bid the same project, and we were able to get the project and be subcontractor to a company called OECC, which is a Taiwanese company. And we're happy to be the subcontractor to them. Once we get paid, we're happy, and we have to perform. But yeah, it's pretty much how it runs around being partners with other people.
I have a question, Henry, from Natalie.
All right, thank you. I just wanted to touch on the point of subcontracting a little bit more. With the joint venture agreements, we understand that you'd have to, at the time of bidding, list the companies as the main members of the consortium or consortium. And what I'm trying to understand is if in the subcontracting, there is discretion then once you have the job to break up that job and bring on players that were not named at the time of bidding, which gives you a bit more flexibility.
Okay, that's a good question. I can explain that simply based on using the project that we are now as an example. So the owner for the company is the St. Lucia government, SLASPA, which is Air, Sea, and Port, because it's part of a ports project. And so they awarded the contract to OECC, which are the people that are the main contractors. They, as I turn around, and they hired us as a subcontractor. Now, our name is there as their subcontractor, but we have to perform, and how we perform, it's in our interest to find other subcontractors if we can't, if we're not able to execute the work with the manpower that we have. And by doing so, we usually find subcontractors that are qualified on that particular island, wherever we are, and utilize their skills as long as they meet the criteria. So the names not necessarily have to be on the bidding list when we're submitting our proposal to them, or our bid. Once we execute the project, then that's all that matters. We can use whoever we want to use.
Okay.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Henry, through you, I think that addresses one of the questions in the chat on whether Trinidadian firms will be coming in as subcontractors. So that is one model of entry.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I see someone also mentioned that their skin is thick for proposals as well, and they love winning. So that's an interesting comment. I noticed, I just wanted to add in here as well. I noticed earlier one of our good friends and colleagues, Labina Lyard, she's an architect with Tiger Key Architecture. So one of our BVI service providers also is on the call. So welcome you, Labina. And if you are prepared to do so later, we would love to have you unmute your mic, maybe if you'd like to turn on your video and give an introduction, and perhaps even add some commentary, a bit of commentary, if you would like in the process, Labina. So another question for Percy and Dion. So if I'm sure every project you have your share of challenges on them. So tell us a little bit about some experiences that you've had that may have been challenging in terms of collaboration, and what you try to avoid based on that, or you do differently, or you would caution T&T firms looking to partner BVI firms in the future about. Percy, you can go first on this one.
I gotta think about it more. Well, go ahead, Dan. Let me think about that.
My business is more consultancy design, and what we have done in the BVI, we have brought in the past years a lot of American-based design firms who may not necessarily understand the lay of the land, so to speak, how to design in these environments. So there are a number of specifications that they have done which may work in USA that wouldn't work in the BVI. I don't think Trinidadian companies would have that challenge because they're in the Caribbean as well. But I don't think Trinidad experiences hurricanes. So again, whoever we bring in as a consultant would have to understand the nature of what's happening in the BVI, whether it's from the hurricane perspective, the earthquake perspective. I know Trinidad has earthquakes. I saw one in recent years on the internet or what have you, but the American-based firms typically have designed certain aspects of the buildings which do not conform to our environment. That's one of the challenges that we've had. So working with a Caribbean-based consultant, I think would work out better.
Okay, thanks.
Henry,
anything to add, Percy?
Henry, repeat the question again. Let's repeat the question.
Essentially, what I was asking is, what kind of challenges you've had with collaborations in the past, and so you would caution, the T&T companies about, just being cautious with dealing with that going forward, or you try to avoid situations with collaboration you try to avoid based on your experiences.
Well, honestly, working with some of these companies, right? If they come into the BVI to work, it's all a matter of how that particular company will move their personnel and to work in harmony with our personnel. It's just a matter of personality as far as I'm concerned. Of course, weather permits the different type of problems that we could have, whether it's hurricane or earthquake or whatever the case might be. It is a collaboration between two people and our two companies and their personal attitudes that hopefully we can make sure that we work together effectively. I don't see much of a problem other than that.
Yeah. Okay, good response. We actually, in your interview, I noticed you had mentioned that due diligence is an important part of your process for recruiting collaborators. And so once you go through that process, you learn who you're dealing with, then you minimize some of that risk.
Yeah, we discussed that in a couple of weeks ago. That's one of my big problems. And then after that, after you've done the due diligence and you have selected who you choose to work with, then I think like in everything else, you just don't go into bed with somebody at face value at all. You have to do your homework to see what they are all about, and if they are above board. There are several areas that you will look at in the due diligence, and you got somebody, a compliance person, to deal with that, to make sure that you're certain that you want to be partners with such individual or such companies, and then you move forward once that is sorted out.
Okay,
thanks, Percy. Yes, because time is running, so I wanted to know if at this time your BVI colleague in the room wanted to give her a very quick intervention, and then we move towards wrapping up.
Yes, we had a chat on the side. So Lavina, if you are ready now, I don't know if you're able to unmute yourself, or Kenika Lavina Liebert, Tiger Key Architecture, if you could allow her to unmute herself. Okay, thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to speak. I actually just received this link from a colleague in St. Kitts a couple of days ago, and figured I'd just jump on and listen in. In contrast to Percy and Dion, both of whom I've collaborated with at different times, my firm is much smaller. Right now, myself as a single individual, and I work with collaborators and sub-consultants for drafting, MEP, structural, and so on. So there's a lot of opportunities to collaborate both on the macro level and the micro level within this market. For example, I've collaborated with Dion on project proposals and expressions of interest. I've also collaborated with another architecture firm in Trinidad, actually, on our recent magistrate's court expression of interest. So there's multiple levels on which we can all work. There's a lot of smaller projects and smaller contracting firms in the BVI. Depending on the level at which you work, it may or may not be worth it to you to collaborate on a smaller project, but I think that's for each individual consultant and sub-consultant to determine. In terms of MEP, there's one electrical engineer based locally that I've worked with, Marlon Maxicott, and Henry's right about the lack of services in that area in the BVI, because I think we collaborate with a mechanical engineer that's actually in St. Lucia as well. So there's a lot of collaborations on the micro level and the macro level within this market. Even though I'm currently collaborating with a firm in St. Kitts on a project that is elsewhere in a third jurisdiction again. So I think we do need to build our interactions throughout the region. Another space in which there's a lot of room is that the BVI has tended to look to the US for building materials a lot. And some practitioners are now looking to China as an option. because I spend a lot of time in St. Kitts, I know that in other Caribbean islands, we get a lot of products imported from Trinidad, imported from St. Lucia. We've had some things here on the higher end, lumber and doors and windows, hardwood imported from South America. So I think there's a lot of ways in which we can look at linkages and collaborations on the micro scale as well as the macro scale. So thanks a lot for letting me put in my 2 cents worth. Good to meet you all.
Thank you, Lavina. I want to thank Percy and Dion as well. Again, your contribution is really valued. And I want to thank Henry for doing a fantastic job, and the rest of the team working with IMS on behalf of exporTT. And I know there's some questions, etc. remaining, but we're really out of time, and you can follow up with exporTT. We will be providing responses to the questions and all of the information requested. So Kanika.
Hi, thank you very much. All right, thank you everyone, the IMS team, Paul Edwards, Percy Rhoden, Dion Stoutt, and Ms. Liebert. Thank you for joining us. That was really an informative session, and I believe everyone will agree. So in these social distancing times, I'm really glad that we could still connect with so many of our local services exporters. The interest is still high, and the opportunities and support from exporTT is still there. So besides our market surveys, we also offer advisory services, targeted research, and finance facilities. So if you're interested in learning more, you all have my email, so please reach out. Anyone who didn't get their questions answered as well, you can reach out and we could forward them as necessary. So in August, we'll be having another seminar just like this one for Curacao, and that's going to be followed by a Doing Business in Miami seminar. So I'm going to be sending you the recording, the presentations, and a very short questionnaire that we're going to ask everyone to please fill out, because that's going to give us the feedback that we need to better support your goals. So thanks again to our wonderful presenters, the staff at exporTT, and everyone who took the time to join us today. Do enjoy the rest of your day, and above all, be safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.